Happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I am Jeremy Birmingham. That is Andrew Ellis, and we are breaking down a very big commitment for Ohio State as the Buckeyes pick up commitment number 21 on the recruiting trail, five-star defensive end Eddrick Houston from Buford High School in Georgia. Andrew, this is one that for months has sort of felt predictable, but at the same time, we're living in this world of college football recruiting where nothing feels predictable. How relieved should the fan base be from your perspective, the common man, just knowing that this went the way we thought it was going to go?
Very relieved. Anytime you got Alabama and all those SEC schools lurking like that, it's kind of an uneasy feeling. And I hope the fact that we've kind of seen this coming for a couple months doesn't kind of downplay the celebration that should be felt amongst the fan base. Because in my eyes, these are the kinds of commitments that lead to national championships. These are the Von Bell, the Raekwon McMillan types. We've seen it so many times, Ohio State trying to go down to the SEC country, especially Georgia, to pull some of these five-star type of defensive guys, and it's not easy to do. So even though we've kind of seen this coming for a couple months now, this is a very big deal, and the fan base should be ecstatic right now.
It's not like Alabama or Clemson or USC or even Georgia, the other schools that are really involved in this fight, stopped recruiting Eddrick Houston just because they thought he was going to Ohio State. This is a battle that went, down to the last couple of weeks between Ohio State and Alabama. The Buckeyes were always in the lead, but it never felt like Alabama was ready to concede that point. And I don't think they're going to now. I imagine this is still a recruitment that they're going to push all the way through signing day if they can, as people take a step back and watch what the Ohio State defense does this year and then try to use that against the Buckeyes if things look similar to the way they have in recent years. But this is a Larry Johnson win. And this is a kid in Eddrick Houston that is exactly what Larry Johnson wants, both on the field and off the field. And I think that's why there's such a good connection between Houston and Larry Johnson. On the field, he's versatile. He's big. He's 6'4", 275 pounds. He can play multiple spots on the line. Off the field, he's sort of reserved, a little bit reclusive, a kid that doesn't want a lot of the spotlight. And I think that sort of connection drew him to Larry Johnson in a way that it helped the Buckeyes in this case.
Yeah, I mean, huge win for Larry Johnson. Obviously, that connection was instrumental in leading to this commitment. I know wanting to play in a 4-3 defense is kind of a factor as well. But anytime you can land one of these guys, whether he ends up as I know last week on Talking Stuff, you kind of laid out some JT Tuimoloau comparisons, just given his size right now. And he's probably going to shed a few pounds now getting back into football shape and everything. But whether he's a strong side defensive end or whether they line him up on the inside, the future is really bright.
Yeah, and the thing, Eddrick wants to be a defensive end, and so that is going to be incumbent on him to make sure he goes out and stays at that 270-pound range if that's where he wants to be. Naturally, I think people look at him and see his body, at what he's done in the last year. He's put on almost 30 pounds since the end of his junior year. Some of that is just pure muscle because he was trying to strengthen after injuring his labrum as a junior, and some of that is just what happens in the offseason. And so now you're going to get to Columbus. If you want to be a defensive end, which is the plan, then he's going to need to make sure that he really dials himself into what Mick Marotti and the Ohio State nutrition program wants him to do. But if he plays inside at all, and that's sort of where my comparison for him lies, is kind of like a Draymond Jones type of player. Draymond, when he came on to St. Ignatius High School, was a basketball player, was a kid who was like 250 pounds when he got to Ohio State at about 6'3.5", 6'4", and ended up getting to now that 275, 280 range where Eddrick is, and then still played a 3-tech his entire career for Ohio State. So things have changed since then for Ohio State on the defensive line and the way that they operate and the types of bodies that they're looking for. But it is hard for me to look at the JT Tuimoloau comparison and say, when JT came in, a lot of people looked at him at 6'4.5", 6'5", and thought he's going to end up being 300 pounds and he's going to play inside. And to JT's credit, as I said last week on Talking Stuff, he has made sure that he worked hard to stay at that 270 range, 275 range, and is now emerging as an elite defensive end with staying at that frame, staying at that weight, and then adding the quickness and the requisite strength that comes from a college program. For Eddrick Houston, him and Justin Scott, who now are the two defensive line commitments in this class, that's 2 5-stars for Ohio State at the position. It's it's weird because we'll look at it and say Larry Johnson's had an up and down cycle, but the ups are super up. And how do you not look at that and be excited if you're a defensive end or an edge rusher looking to find someone to join that, as Ohio State looks to find someone to join this class?
Yeah, it really doesn't get much better than Eddrick Houston and Justin Scott as your two starting pieces on the defensive line. We've said it many times, kind of expecting it to end up being 4, maybe even 5 at the position. They're going to try to get a couple more pure edge rushing types to go along with those two. But it's really a hell of a start for Larry Johnson, and there's still some work to be done. And yes, he's missed on a few guys, and I'm sure he's going to keep recruiting some of those guys. But the defensive line is in a very good spot now with a couple months until the early.
Yeah, and the question everyone will have is like, what's next? And that's understandable and obvious. Ohio State is still recruiting Marquise Lightfoot, as aggressively as they can. They're not, if we're being honest, the Buckeyes are not like super aggressive on the recruiting trail right now. It's the middle of camp. They're trying to get ready for Indiana, trying to pick a quarterback, et cetera. So a lot of the next wave of recruiting efforts will happen in the next few weeks, but that's not really the focus at this point for Ohio State. What is the focus for Ohio State is identifying who those next wave of targets are going to be, however, and that's not on Larry Johnson or Alan Clark. That's on Mark Pantoni and the scouting department and figuring out who those guys are that they really need to go after. We know that they're still recruiting Marquise Lightfoot because he said as much. We know that they're still recruiting Charleston Collins, the Arkansas commitment, because he's told me as much. We know that Ohio State is one of the top 2 or 3 schools for Dominic McKinley, the defensive end from Lafayette, Louisiana, who will make his announcement early September. He's expected to tell coaches on September 1st. I don't know if that's going to be the exact date of the commitment. Ohio State sources still feel pretty comfortable and confident there. Texas continues to be extremely confident. Oklahoma's confident. We'll see. I think what's interesting about McKinley, Andrew, is that at his body type, 6'5", 275 pounds, if you put Dominic McKinley and Justin Scott and Eddrick Houston as a 3-man class, each one of those guys is a 5-star on multiple sites. That is allowing you to do a lot of different things when it comes to that 4th guy, whether that's Booker Pickett, who, as we've talked about, is undersized but is extremely explosive as an edge rusher, whether that allows you to take a flyer on someone like Dominic Kirks in the state of Ohio. It gives you some flexibility. And so, I don't like to be the guy that immediately starts saying, what's next? But if you can find a way to win the Dominic McKinley battle, you get really flexible going from here to signing day.
Yeah, you do. You've got Justin Scott, who's that pure interior guy, and then you've got McKinley and Eddrick Houston, who are, I guess, a little bit more versatile. But it's going to be an exciting couple months. Booker Pickett's not really close to a decision. It doesn't seem like. We'll see how things play out with Marquise Lightfoot and then some of those other names you mentioned. I know the focus is going to be on the season, obviously, for Ohio State and for these guys on their own high school seasons. But it's going to be interesting to see how these final 2 or 3 pieces kind of come together along the defensive line.
On film, there's a lot of things to really like about Eddrick Houston. That versatility stands out, and that's why you can look at him in his current frame and think to yourself, he could stay on the outside. He's got almost an 80-inch wingspan, very long. He's quick. He runs sideline to sideline, and the thing about him that really stands out to me is his motor. For a kid of that size, for a kid with the recruiting accolades that he has, it's not oftentimes you'll see someone that is also the hardest worker on your team. And that's what Eddrick Houston is. I'm going to read this one quote, if I can, from his high school coach, Brian Appling. And it said, I've got a different one with Eddrick. He's the hardest working kid, but then he has all the talent in the world. How do you beat that? He's a force on both sides of the ball that is growing into a very special football player. His strength and athleticism have helped him become a great pass rusher and great run defender. He's a great tight end who can open up holes for our running game as well and threaten the passing game. This is a kid who is the anchor on the Buford's 4x400 team. And running the 400 in 56 seconds at 6'4" and 270 pounds, that's pretty special. I don't want to dismiss the fact that he could stay at defensive end, but I think it will be the challenge for him as he gets to Ohio State to stay in that mold. The question for Ohio State fans is always going to be, what happens between now and signing day? How do you keep him in the mix? Eddrick has not set up a date to return to Ohio State, but you can fully expect now that he's committed that he will be on campus. I would assume he'll try to get to the Penn State game. That one's shaping up to be a night game in Columbus, if that's or the Michigan State game, because that one is for sure a night game in Columbus. And when you're traveling from Buford to Columbus, it's an easy trip, but you'd still rather be there for a 3:30 or a night game as opposed to a noon game. So the Buckeyes should feel good about the chances of holding on to this commitment. And the main reason I feel that way is because the way Eddrick Houston has handled his recruitment to this point. It's not about drama. It's not about theatrics.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And we've talked many times about Buford. It's not some feeder school to Georgia or any one particular program. Obviously, KJ Bolden committed to Florida State a couple weeks ago. I've never talked to Eddrick Houston in my life, but based on all accounts, he seems like a very good kid. And my flip alert is not particularly high on this.
Yeah, unless the Buckeye defense completely falls apart, or Ryan Jay gets fired, or Larry Johnson gets fired, or something like that. I don't think that people should have too many concerns about how this ends up down the road. I think for the Buckeyes, it's just important to stay busy in Georgia. It is a state that produces as much talent per capita as anyone in the country, on par with Florida and Texas and California, and Georgia can't take them all. That's really the goal. That's really the bottom line here. This was a battle that I thought originally was going to be more of an Ohio State-Clemson fight. But Alabama, because they're Alabama and Nick Saban is as good as he is, like, it became an Ohio State-Alabama fight. But it's a huge win. And I think Ohio State fans, as you mentioned earlier in the show, because it has felt somewhat expected, maybe it won't resonate quite as much with the fan base as a Dylan Stewart commitment would have, because that one feels a little more electric because he's the 6'5", 245-pound sack machine or whatever. But what you're getting with Eddrick Houston is an incredibly solid football player who looks like a 5-star, plays like a 5-star, and a kid that is only going to continue to get better, and a kid that fits the Ohio State program and culture to a T. And that is ultimately as big a win as you can get for Ohio State when you find all those things in one player.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I know I personally had my doubts about this one a few months ago. You've kind of had him penciled into your class for a while, so props to you on that one. But this is one that the fan base should absolutely be celebrating. Yeah. So couldn't be much bigger than this one.
Yeah, I felt that way after really talking to Eddrick in April when he made his spring visit to Columbus. He talked about the circle of care that Ohio State has, talked about Ryan Day and Larry Johnson as people, not as coaches, talked about just how much his family loved the atmosphere at Ohio State. And from that moment forward, and even months before that, I had put him in my class. It just seemed like the right fit for Ohio State in many, many ways. And while that is no longer quite as easy to predict as it was a few years ago, there are certain indicators that someone just it fits the Buckeye program. And as I said, the Ohio State culture. And that's why Eddrick Houston is commitment number 21 for Ohio State in the class of 2024. Buckeyes have the number 2 ranked class in the country. They are nipping at the heels of Georgia for the number 1 ranked class in the nation in the class of 2024. Eddrick Houston, according to Rivals.com, is the 4th 5-star committed to Ohio State. And you have Mylan Graham right on the precipice of being a 5-star as well. Ohio State, if they can land Dominic McKinley on September 1st or early in September, will likely pass Georgia to be the number 1 class in the country, at least at that point. And that's really all you can ask for a class that people look at and say, oh, where's the defense? Where's the defense? All of a sudden, you've got a couple really big-time pieces to maneuver around and to build around. And that's why Eddrick Houston is a massive pickup for Ohio State on the recruiting trail. We're going to let you get back to snap judgments and everything else that's happening around Ohio State tonight. But for Andrew Ellis, I'm Jeremy Birmingham. This has been a commitment analysis on the podcast. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.